Okay, everybody, welcome. Happy day after Mother's Day. I hope everybody has recovered. I know I had a huge weekend of lots of fun. We actually called it Mother's Day Festival. My name is Laura Barr. I'm the owner and founder of Emerging Educational Consulting. We are so happy to have Jamie joining us today. It's such a pleasure. You know, our company provides one-to-one mentorship for students from the beginning to the end of the application process. And when I talk about what I do, I really talk about how my heart is. I wake up every day to help grow good humans. And the way that I think about growing good humans is with education and information. So having Jamie here today is really an honor, because talk about growing good humans. Jamie, I'm just going to let you dive in to talk about who you are and what you do and how you commit every day to growing good humans.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here. And for everyone listening, we absolutely love connecting and collaborating with Laura. So it's really an honor to be here. My name is Jamie Binder. I'm the owner and founder of Ahava Counseling, partner in the Wraparound Collective, which I can speak to a little bit more. And really, my heart is in the same place. It's growing good humans and then helping them in that launching phase. And really, we do that with whole family healing. Knowing that growing good humans requires us as parents to also be really healthy in the process and giving ourselves grace when we aren't. So, in effect, as I started joined in starting the Wraparound Collective and founded Ahava Counseling, a lot of it is we're really targeted on meeting our clients physically and emotionally where they're at, whether that's community-based, home-based, in the office. Wherever we meet with them is intended to meet their needs in real time. And so we have, and this is where our collaboration with Laura has been so instrumental. In our Wraparound Collective, we're really providing comprehensive care to make sure that treatment doesn't become fragmented for our clients and that all systems are working together, because everything's got to change in order for us to find sustainable growth and change for our little humans. And so in my practice, we range, and we have clinicians that specialize 0 to 5, early childhood, adolescents, and young adults, with a variety of different specialties. And that really is, in effect, meant to treat the entire family system, which is why we do have such a wide range of specialties. So that's the quick 30-second TED Talk on our practice, but our services range, and they are highly individualized. We don't do milieu programming. It's really just to target our client-specific goals and getting them to where they want to be.
It just makes me want to take a deep breath, because I feel like today growing our kids has become so challenging. I mean, pre-COVID, then COVID, post-COVID, and all of the challenges with mental health. And it's interesting because what we do in our practice in the college piece is really this idea of visioning, and this idea of the student taking the job of visioning their future and the parents taking the role of like helping to let go and to launch. And
Mhm.
it's an incredible juggling act. And I think there's a lot of information out there and a lot that parents and kids have to navigate. One of the things that they have to navigate is a very complex college admissions process. I
Sure.
mean, people have heard me say this before. I applied to like 2 colleges. I typed my essay on a calculator. I don't even think my parents even knew where I was applying. Really, the cost of tuition, I was mostly able to cover myself. It was just such a different time. Now college tuition is the average college tuition out of state is somewhere between $70,000 and $90,000. The admissions complexity as far as how many students are applying, and colleges that in the past students thought they were going to get into, they're not. And I
Mhm.
think there's a big disconnect between what parents understand about that process, what students understand about the process, and then also the pressure everybody puts on themselves. And every year, I want to have this conversation with someone like you who can help guide. How do we help build that resilience for disappointment? And this is a unique disappointment. This isn't like just losing the state championship, right?
Right.
That's a bummer. And you're going to have to deal with that. But this is sometimes students and parents have put a lot of pressure on the type of college, the kind of college. And I have had situations where I've had either parents or students come to me where they haven't been accepted to some of their top schools and have been pretty devastated. And so I'm curious, I'm curious if you have some tips. I mean, if you could say top 3 tips for building resilience through this process, what would that look like?
Yeah. I see this as a skill. Like if we're talking about this top bottom, we're seeing this as a skill of dealing with an internalized sense of failure. And so if we're talking about kind of the 3 tips, these kids and these parents have worked tirelessly to get to the point where they can apply to these top schools. And part of it is kind of pausing and celebrating some of those successes, but understanding that there is a future orientation where we can celebrate the successes that have occurred, but what does it look like moving forward, right? And how do we help our kids stay on a trajectory to continue to launch into the next phase of their life? And so I would say that in addition to celebrating the successes and the things that they've already achieved, another huge part of this is also helping them to have manageable expectations and to help guide that future orientation and to give them a path to be able to align their next steps with the overall goals. Now, we know that in certain developmental stages, I think we all have, right? We've all had these ideas of what we want our career to look like. And then we get into the workforce and we're like, oh, actually, I'm going to pivot here. I remember starting my career initially in nonprofit, and then I paused and I was like, no, I need to be on a more micro level, right? So it's celebrating the successes that have already occurred to maintain that strong sense of self, because when we're not kind of meeting the mark on our own self-identified goals, really takes a hit on these kids and their internalized sense of success. Next is manageable expectations, and then aligning their next steps and making sure that they stay in that realm of future orientation. And so it's really giving them other options and different avenues to meet these identified goals, right? I've seen some kids also giving them the prospect of transfer. And so making sure that they have options and agency in this process around what is going to help sustain that sense of resilience and that motivation. Because when we're all dealing with and we fall short or we run into a wall and we're not able to get to that next step, really tend to lose motivation. So giving them some tangible next steps and agency in determining what the next step is going to be, and how this again aligns with their sense of self, that resilience, and keeping them moving to the next step. And I will say, and I want to congratulate parents that are listening for getting your kids to this level, right? I always say you can't give enough blood or donate enough organs to get your kids the academic support and all the other supports that they need. So slowing down as a parent and also celebrating that and managing your own feelings of disappointment and frustration is really instrumental as well.
I can piggyback on the managing expectations too, because I think it's almost like a coming to terms with even how we build the college list. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want students to even be in the point where they don't get into all of their schools, because there are schools on their list that they will love no matter what. And maybe that's University of Kansas, or maybe that's CSU, or maybe that's, we can reach so high, but we have to have the place that they know they'll love no matter what, and the comfort that their parents believe in their heart it's okay. And I have noticed sometimes words aren't enough. That there's like, I don't know, this is kind of strange. I didn't even warn you I was going to ask this, but is there like a energetic or like oh, I don't know how to explain it, because I sometimes have parents who would be like, we don't care where our kids go. Like, we honestly do not care. Like, we just want them to be happy. But then when their students don't get in, then that doesn't really seem to be so. And I think there seems to be a sense of disappointment. And listen, I am speaking for myself too. I mean, I remember when my youngest son, Devin, did not get in to some of his top choices, or he didn't get money at some of the top places we could afford. Like, I tried to keep myself together, but I did also feel disappointed. And I'm not even sure if you're prepared to answer this kind of question because it's so tricky, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And so, questions specifically around parents managing their disappointment, right? And I think a lot of that is, I always say it's like really, first of all, how you internalize it yourself and then how you represent that to the child. And so, a big part of that is first from parent to child, it's maintaining that value-based praise, right? Because a lot of times, again, it really impacts their sense of self and all of the things that they felt they were good at. And so really reinforcing from the resiliency standpoint, um, the values that they have that they have utilized to get them to the point where they are kind of negotiating between different universities. And listen, it's an adult skill to look at the financial aspect of things and then to make an informed and realistic decision. I think for parents, and again, this is under a large assumption, but I think a lot of parents, when they're managing that disappointment, in the same way as the kids, they're looking forward. How is this going to impact their future? This is when it really counts, right? And I think sometimes it takes a hit on us as parents and saying, like, did we do everything that we can? Right. And how does this impact your view of yourself as a parent? And listen, sometimes, and I know we all try to say it's not about ego and it's not about the image, but I think as parents, we all want to say, hey, our kid did great and they're going to this amazing school. Right. But how do we define amazing? And is it individualized to that specific kiddo and what's going to be supportive in their growth trajectory? Or is it the image that we're putting out and that we want people to view our child's success in one specific aspect? And so I think there's some management of our own, kind of internalized sense of failure and success as a parent. And then more so fear for what's going to happen for our kiddos' future if they're not getting into the program with concentrated pre-med, right? Or they're going to the state school that they would otherwise prefer they go to a more private university. So it's a really delicate balance for some of these parents. And we really see that the way that parents respond informs the child's resiliency. Do you congratulate them on the schools that they got into? Or did they say, well, what happened with your essay? Or did you listen to Laura's instructions? Or were you, all of those things? And so it's important. It's an important reflection period as parents to manage their expectations for their child's success as well.
Well, it's fun for me because I think these conversations I think our group of parents do a pretty good job of managing their disappointment. But what I've noticed is if we help build that resilience starting freshman, sophomore, junior year, then our senior parents are much more prepared. So it does take some practice. I'm curious, you said values-based praise. Can you give us a couple examples so
Sure.
all of us can start using?
Sure, absolutely. And I so appreciate what you just said, because it's not in the second semester of senior year when they're making the decisions. It's all about building that resilience through developing executive functioning skills, right? Managing their own internal stimuli. And also, what about the social contagion portion of peace, right? So as parents, there's so many systems that we're trying to protect our kids in. And as we're talking about value-based praise, we all want our kids to be well-adjusted, successful, and happy. And so reinforcing the values that you want to see in your kids. So for example, hey, Johnny, thanks for taking initiative on those dishes. It really shows me that you are an equal contributor or that you're responsible, right? Hey, thanks for listening right away. It shows me how respectful you are. And so giving, and not just saying good job to a kid, telling them exactly what value you can associate with the decision and action that they've taken, right? We're so quick when a kid stays out late or breaks curfew to say that was really irresponsible or here's the consequence. But what about that operant conditioning where we are reinforcing to them that they are showing us their adult skills as they are practicing in real time, right? So it can be anything as small as thanks for taking initiative for your homework. I see how committed you are. I see how determined you are. And so really instilling and helping them that's what builds that sense of self, is when they know what values are the most important for them to put out to the world and for them to honor with integrity for themselves.
This makes my heart's beating an extra beat because one of the very first things we do with our students is values work, and we have them identify their top 10, 5, top 3 values. And then one of the things that we do is when we start looking at building that resume we kind of use the David Brooks eulogy resume. I don't love the eulogy part because it makes people feel worried, but it's like this idea that we are living our minutes into what we believe, and that these high school times are times for students to figure out their values and then to choose things in the world that they want to do to prove to themselves and to the world that they have these values. Yeah. And it's funny because if we actually, this idea of growing good humans for us is rooted in that. And then when they are in the application process, they're often telling the stories of their values-based experiences. So what you're saying is giving me goosebumps, because what you're also saying is, gosh, maybe we should do a better job of sharing with our parents, making sure our parents are really clear about what the values of their students are. So then they are reinforcing and working on the backside of really noticing where they're living into that. So that's fun.
I can't tell you how many times I talk to parents who just spent, we'll do a 30-minute initial call and they'll spend 25 minutes telling me how wonderful their kid is. And I sometimes have to stop and wonder, does your kid know that? How are we sharing that information with them? Is it just like intermittent praise where it's a good job? But that is part of growing good humans, right? Because your kids are inherently good and we need them to know exactly what areas that they thrive in. And again, giving praise and that intermittent praise comes in areas that they are experiencing difficulties and giving them like a bit of a runway with some guardrails to make mistakes and learn from them. And that doesn't mean that, again, your child is bad. It means that there's, certain systems around them that are impacting their ability to really act on those values in real time. So reinforcing in situations that are challenging when they, it can kind of make up for lost ground and when they're doing fantastic. And so I think we're all biased and we all believe that our kids are the best, and they are. And so it's not some illusion. Our kids are amazing inherently. And so we just have to get them to understand what those things are so that they can effectively launch into the next steps of their lives with a lot of self-sufficiency.
I was just with my sister in Arizona, and we were watching a basketball game, and her son was actually the coach, and he's like 28 now. And we raised our kids together, and we were watching him coach. And I turned to her and I said, "Remember when we finally understood that our children were just kind of ordinary?" And it's like, oh, okay. Yes, we have extraordinary kids, but when we are applying to colleges, there are
Mm.
thousands and thousands of kids who have 4.0s and perfect ACT scores and have played the piano and who do, like, there's a lot of kids out there like that. And it doesn't mean they're not extraordinary, but maybe I mean, I always feel so self-conscious saying this, but it was such a relief to myself and to my sisters when we were like, oh, okay, we get it now. And it kind of gave us a sense of relief. And I imagine our kids probably back then felt a sense of relief,
Yeah.
right? That we're all just trying to figure it out. And I often say to parents, like, listen, we're wired to think our children are extraordinary. Like, biologically, that's our job.
Right.
And if we can help set realistic expectations and realistic kind of, like, what is it that we're looking for them to produce because we feel like they're extraordinary, if we can look at that correlation and then back down, I think we can help cause that sense of peace that these kids really need.
Yeah.
One of the things I remember, the day that I called you to ask you if you could come on, and it was a student of ours where she really actually refused to put a target school on her list. We did get her to put one on, and she actually did not get into the 6 Ivy League schools that she applied to.
Yeah.
And I could feel it coming. And this has only happened to me once in my practice, and I will never do the same thing going forward because it was pretty heartbreaking. And one of the things that she said is, she said, what was all of this for? Like,
Mm.
all of the things that I did, what was all of this for? And she was so devastated to the point that I was actually concerned about her well-being. And I thought, what are some of those really hardcore, like, interventions that her parents or I or someone could have done? Like, what are your red flags when you hear a student say that? And how can we prevent that? And in some ways, you kind of talked about that with the resilience, but this was pretty dramatic. And
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you have anything to around that.
Yeah. Gosh. Wow. I mean, Listen, I'll say that's a loaded question because that's not, kids that come to therapy aren't always kids that you would imagine that have these like pervasive or severe mental health like limitations that come up over the trajectory of their high school. And what I will say with kids that are incredibly high performing is that oftentimes if they can't do it to the best of their ability and get into that Ivy League school, then sometimes they kind of falter and don't do it at all. Right. And so that scaffolding and making sure that there are remaining future oriented is huge, and giving them agency, because here's what happened to that young woman. She didn't get into any of these schools. And so in effect, and that was not in her control. Right. And so sometimes we overassert control in certain areas or completely relinquish control in certain areas. So in scaffolding your kids, and, I don't give any recommendations about college applications. I stay in my lane, but it's giving them, whether it's a safety school or whether it's giving them options to be able to reapply, but as much as possible, giving your child agency in the next steps, whatever that looks like. Get them involved in purpose-driven activities, because if their purpose is surrounded by school and performance, we need to give them some other tangible metrics where they can say, gosh, and stop and slow down and say, I have really experienced success in this area. So it's not all defined by college. But think about it. This kid didn't get into school. That's all people are talking about. They're talking about where they're going to school, when they're leaving, their roommate, their all of these exciting next steps. So giving your child something to look forward to and working together with providers so that they have some agency and some control in what those next steps look like. I mean, I cannot imagine working my butt off for 4 years to, piano lessons, the extracurriculars, student government, all of those different pieces, just to feel like none of it had any value or worth. So again, those purpose-driven activities, give them other value, give them other opportunities to demonstrate their resilience and to show how absolutely capable they are. But again, give them that sense of self outside of those metrics of what feels like an accomplishment or a success for them. So they're more flexible and a little bit more well-rounded. Like I can say, you could go to the best school, and if you have no friends at that school, it's going to be really difficult, right? So giving them those other social avenues, purpose-driven activities to achieve that sense of wholeness in themselves.
I love that. So let me say it back to you. Because it's interesting, because I've never used purpose-driven activities in the language in our practice, but it's exactly what it's that eulogy resume, right? Like, are we doing this because we're building this perfect resume? And what's so ironic is that colleges don't even care that much about that anymore. They're looking, the number 4 thing they are looking for when they're looking for students is character. And the way that we prove character is through the minutes we spend doing purpose-driven activities.
Yes.
What you just said about, I also have never quite made the connection between purpose-driven activities and the development of self.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that just makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Is it possible for you to expand on that for a second? Like, why does purpose-driven activities help build a sense of self?
Sure, absolutely. So when we talk about purpose-driven activities, I mean, it starts at, I always say, like, if you're talking about college prep, it starts at like the ripe age of 5 or 6, and giving your kids that opportunity to find areas that they are successful outside of, the clear metrics of school. So when we talk about purpose-driven activities, I ask kids, what are you passionate about, right? Or what do you want to expand upon? So that can be anything from, I have a kid that's volunteering at, a cat shelter. That feels purpose driven. They're able to take care of something else when maybe they don't feel like they're always able to take care of themselves, right? So giving them, whether it's putting them in a leadership position, whether it's giving them some confidence through teamwork, through social connection. And so when we're talking about social connection, people always think like, oh, like my kid just went to a sleepover, but it is important that you check in with your kid and really see how they are achieving a sense of fulfillment. Is it by, and I'll just give you an example and then we'll find a middle ground. It might be some kids that need to be the center of attention, right? Or it might be those kids that kind of hang back, or it might be those kids that are looking to include everyone else. that builds the character that colleges want to see. Are you going to be able to build community, maintain community? Is it, and we talk about like piano and soccer and all the things that we want to put on a resume, but how does that build your kid's sense of confidence? You don't go onto the field and immediately score the goal in the final game. It takes a lot of practice. And so in real time, we're building that resiliency while also giving them a sense of purpose and larger meaning in the world around them. And that social emotional development is instrumental. And so it can be animals, it can be social connections, it can be hobbies. And, you know, I have a lot of kids that are so focused on community service. I was working, I'll tell you, like talk about purpose-driven activity. I say that I have like a whole team of little social justice warriors on my caseload, right? And this is not for the purpose of applications, but I have a girl that makes burritos and goes out every Sunday and passes them out to transient folks downtown. And that really gives her a sense of purpose that she can utilize her privilege to give back to the larger world. And it brings a lot of meaning for her. So those purpose-driven activities not only will help them in the college application process, but it gives them that meaning. And social connection. I mean, that is the hub of our existence, right? Is to be connected with the larger world around us. And so without that, it does create a lot of deficits with kiddos.
I imagine that if the lovely, lovely student that said, "What did I do all this for?" If she had engaged in more purpose driven activities, she perhaps would say something like, "Well, while I didn't get in, I still spent 4 years making a difference in my community, and I'm okay with that. And as a result, dot, dot, dot," right? How lovely. I love that. I mean, I just love it. And I feel like it's kind of the perfect place to end the conversation. We do have some people who have joined us. I want to make sure, does anybody have any questions? And then, Jamie, is there anything else you just have to add in reflection of this conversation today?
You know, I will say that our clients that have had the opportunity to work with Laura have had so much scaffolding and so much encouragement. And so I say, like, you know, what would Laura do? Right? It's like really praise and really reinforce your kids the successes that they have, you know, the successes and the accomplishments that they've already experienced. So that's where I would say, like, you know, be behind your kid 1000%, give them opportunities for deviation, and really try to separate your own expectations for what your kid needs. And we do that as providers as well. It's, hey, I see this client's capacity or I see the student's capacity. How do we allow them to get there on their own? So managing those internal expectations and just loving on those kids when they're struggling. They need it. Thank you.
Jamie, thank you from the bottom of my heart this time. I hope this will be the beginning of a series of something that we'll create together. I love it.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, friend.
Okay. Talk to y'all soon.